think when we do something like that.
What's up, fight fans? This is the Combat Connection. I'm your host, Brett Cagle, and joining me this week is Pat Danna, as Eddie is on the road for the LFA card this weekend. Pat, we got a lot to talk about, and we got to jump right into UFC 319 from Chicago last weekend. Khamzat Chimaev puts on one of the most dominant performances we've seen over 5 rounds in a UFC title shot. But some people, including Luke Thomas, are saying that it wasn't necessarily the most fan-friendly and it wasn't their cup of tea. Where do you sit on that? Do you think that it is a dominant performance and should be justified and looked at that way? Or should we say, Khamzat didn't really necessarily do what we thought he could in order to finish the fight and what he might have been able to do within his abilities?
I think that both things, I guess, could be said in a sense, but also I think we got to give Khamzat a hall pass, right? I mean, he's been in some entertaining wars throughout his career. Either he's running through a guy or he's in an entertaining war, or just, he's really been dominant for the most part. So when you have a fight that's so dominant like that, and you are constantly working, but you're not really getting exactly what you were looking for, it happens, especially against a guy like Dricus. I think people really are underestimating how tricky of a fighter Dricus is. So in regards to the performance and the dominance, I mean, it was as dominant of a title performance we've ever seen, up there with one of the most dominant title wins of all time. But at the same time, was it that exciting? There were definitely moments that were really exciting. Yeah, I thought there were a lot of really exciting moments. But I also thought there were times where Khamzat was just kind of more coasting on top and just accepting the position that he had instead of trying to advance and finish the fight, which is okay. Like I said, it's not really a problem. But it just, let's just hope it doesn't become a trend, Let's just hope he continues to be the Khamzat he was, that we know him to be before this fight,
Yeah, officially on the statistics last weekend, fight fans, Khamzat landed a total of 529 total strikes. Only 37 of those were significant. Dricus only landed 45 over the 25 minutes. Khamzat had 12 takedowns on 17 attempts, good for 21 minutes of control time. That's got to be close to a record in a 5-round fight for a title. But as far as Khamzat's concerned, I really think this puts him into a new league of his own in terms of stardom, right? Because you got Ilia Topuria, we've got some other guys, but it's really Ilia and Khamzat now as your bell cows of the promotion and your most talented fighters moving forward. Pat, were you surprised that they moved him all the way up to number 4 pound for pound this week?
Not really, because I feel like he's a guy that has been on the pound for pound list or just kind of like right there. And he's been a guy that's been an inevitable champion. I mean, me and my friends were talking about it when the fight happened, but you would have been told you were crazy if you said that Khamzat finally won the belt 3 years after his fight with Gilbert Burns. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
People expected him to be the champion right after that fight. He was expected to get a title fight next. Then he moves up to middleweight, weight misses, this, that, whatever. A lot of things have happened with Khamzat's career, but it feels like this was almost inevitable for the most part. So I'm not too shocked that that they ended up just pushing him right up to the top of that pound for pound list. But I just hate that he's above Pantoja. I know Pantoja.
Yeah, that's.
All his title defenses, it feels like they mean nothing when you just won't give him any credit on the pound for pound list.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the body of work of Pantoja, I don't think necessarily can be thrown out. But it's good to see Khamzat there in the top 5 pound for pound. I think he's going to be a name moving forward. But for Dricus, I think this is a really big problem. It kind of lays the blueprint for how guys are going to beat him in the future. And if you look at the rest of this division with Kai Barallo, Nasruddin Imavov, Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, who we're going to talk about his fight here in a little bit that just got announced with Reinier de Ridder, another guy, all of them primarily grapplers, right? And if they're able to implement a game plan similar to what Khamzat Chimaev did, last weekend, then Dricus is going to be in a significant amount of trouble here with the top 10 moving forward. Is that kind of how you see it too?
Yeah, no, on Dricus's point of view, I think he is still a good grappler. I still do think he is one of the better grapplers at middleweight. I just think a guy like Chimaev embarrasses him. He still did out-grapple Adesanya. He still did out-grapple Whitaker. He out-grappled Strickland. I still think he does out-grapple a lot of the top middleweights. But guys like Barallo and Anthony Hernandez, they're definitely watching that Khamzat fight. And they're like, oh, I could definitely beat a guy like Dricus by implementing that same style. So it definitely is a little bit scary. But depending on the matchup Dricus gets next, he may not have to worry about, because those guys are going right to the title fight, presumably next or right there. And Dricus is kind of going to have to work his way back into that conversation now.
Yeah, and for Hamzat, he had probably 3 10-8 rounds. Was that something that was alarming to you? Because, I mean, there was no offense from Dricus. He couldn't really keep him off of him. In my opinion, the way that Hamzat was able to get inside on distance, and it wasn't the first shot, right? Dricus was defending the first shot a lot of the times. It was the chain wrestling of Chimaev, the second, the third attempt, his tenacity to continue going forward, the takedowns that eventually led him to success and that 21 minutes of control. Outside of Merab, I think that he really stands alone as someone with that gas tank in the grappling that's able to go for those third, fourth, and fifth shot attempts on one sequence.
Well, we also didn't really know that before this fight, too, because the last times we've seen him in round 3, he was tired against Burns, he was tired against Usman, but those fights were also fought at such a high pace. You know what I mean? Like, he was going in there to take both of those guys out in round 1, and almost did in both cases, top-level fighters like Burns and Usman. And then I think we saw in this fight, he said, you know what, I'm not going to burn myself out just going all for that first round finish. I'm going to even out my cardio, see if I can maybe get him out later, and he couldn't, because he ends up losing his energy. Dricus ends up losing his energy. And by the time the 5th round happened, I mean, I think Dricus actually had more energy than Chimaev, right? I mean, we saw the fight ended. Dricus ended on top, had that submission. So I'm not too sure how good Chimaev's cardio is in general, because it depends on how he fights, you know? It really is. Yeah. It's a style.
He's got to stay with this strength and conditioning coach, though, in my opinion.
That's what it is. And he also has to just depend. It depends on his style. You know, it depends on if he's going out there looking for that round one, like guaranteeing that round 1 finish, or if he goes out there like he did against Dricus. So his cardio is going to be a big question mark in these fights, because it's going to depend on what his game plan is and how he plans to come out and fight these guys.
Yeah, I think so too. But Pat, when we sit here and look at the rest of the division, we mentioned it briefly: Barallo, Hernandez, Renier de Ritter. How do you think those guys' grappling stacks up against Hamzat? When I look at it, I think that Kai Barallo is probably physically the strongest guy of those 3 and might be the hardest to take down. But if the fight did hit the floor, I think that Anthony Fluffy Hernandez would have a lot of good transitions and maybe submission attempts for Hamzat that we didn't see last weekend. Who do you think matches up well with Hamzat grappling in this division right now?
I honestly...
Or do you think he's going to make everybody look like that last weekend?
I don't know if he's going to make everyone look like that, but I don't know who matches up with him well in this division at that point with the grappling, because like the 2 guys you said are the 2 guys that I would say as well, Anthony Hernandez and Cal Barallo. Problem is, Anthony Hernandez... great grappler, great on top. We don't know as much about him on his back, you know? If Hamzat puts him on his back, is he going to wilt? You know, we've never really seen it. You know, but we did see Brendan Allen put him in some bad positions, and he was able to get out, and he ended up winning round 3 in that fight. But Brendan Allen did have him in some bad positions in that fight. If Allen has you in bad positions, probably Hamzat will too. So that's going to be interesting to see if he could thug those out and potentially out cardio Hamzat. But Cal Barallo is another interesting one, because I like his jiu-jitsu. I think he's better off his back than a guy like Fluffy would be, just presuming. But we have seen him on his back a bit more, so I want to say that I trust him on his back. And honestly, I think his striking is tricky, you know, nothing crazy, but I think his striking is tricky. If it was on the feet, I think maybe he could find something. You know, we did see him kind of flash KO Cannonier, even though that wasn't called. He did flash KO Cannonier. And we could see him maybe pull off a sub on his back. So I think I like Barallo's chances the most, but I really don't know if I like any of theirs, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, I think maybe the hardest matchup for him is Nasruddin Imavov, if Imavov can get through Barallo. But there's a lot of great matchups here in the rest of the middleweight division moving forward in this calendar year, and it's going to be interesting to see what we have coming forward. But congratulations to Hamzat Chimaev. It was a long time coming. Middleweight champion of the world after that run at welterweight, and then obviously at 185 pounds as well. Congratulations to him as he becomes a new champion and number 4 on the pound-for-pound rankings. But, Pat, there was a lot of complaints about the main event, but you can't complain about the 2 fights previously, back-to-back spinning elbow knockouts, and one of the most vicious knockouts I've seen in Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico. We were both talking about it last week. We thought that Aaron Pico was a very, very aggressive fighter does have one-punch power in wrestling. We didn't get to necessarily see him use that wrestling in this matchup. He came forward, and I was explaining it to somebody, is that Aaron kind of gets into this dead space where he kind of doesn't go for takedowns or punches and kind of thinks about what he's going to do, and you can't do that against someone who's an elite counter striker. He entered that territory a couple times with Verone and didn't pay for it. About the third time that he did without taking him down or throwing a punch inside, he paid for it dearly. What do you think about the performance from Verone Murphy? I expected him to kickbox on the outside and kind of technically point his way around, but one of the most entertaining flash knockouts in UFC history, and I was in the building. It was the best knockout I've ever seen personally. What did you think of it?
Well, I mean, we did talk about it. I think we said, Lerone outpointing him was by far the most likely outcome, even with Pico's chin concerns. We just weren't sure if Lerone had that power, which it wasn't necessarily the power, it was the unpredictability of it, and just the sick. That was a sick spinning elbow. I mean, that was so awesome. But I mean, what you said was perfect. He gets in this dead space. Pico keeps doing it, and that's why he's been knocked out in these fights now. It's a pattern now. It's not just like something that happened and then it's been correct. No, this is a pattern now where he gets in this dead space. He gets in the pocket. Lerone had his back to him for a second there. And instead of just jumping on Lerone's back, he kind of like sat there like, oh, should I punch? Should I take him down? And then it looked like he was going to go in for a takedown and ate a spinning elbow on the way in. Like those seconds to react. This is where fighting a lower level of competition could come into play, because you don't have to worry about something like that from a guy like, Justin Gonzalez, let's say. You know what I mean?
Jeremy Kent.
Like,
yeah.
You get what I mean? Like, you're not worrying about stuff like that in those moments, like a flash spinning elbow like that. So I think we saw Pico perform very well up to that point. I think he was winning, like, by a bit. He was kind of beating Lerone up to that point. So I do think we saw the skill was there and that he actually might be more skilled than Lerone, which is very interesting. But if he's going to keep doing this thing where he puts himself in bad places and then his chin isn't going to be able to take the shots he receives when he does, I don't know how much I don't know how much I love his future. I don't know I don't know how to feel about him at this point, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, man, it's he's one of the most skilled guys in the world. We've always talked about the talent of Aaron Pico. He's a guy who we thought could be world champion at a very young age. But when you get knocked out like this, like he's been against Henry Corrales, he's been against Adam Boric, and then again this weekend, those were 3 devastating knockouts. And there's, it's like milk. Milk has a certain due date, and when that due date's done, it's no good. And if this guy keeps getting chinned like this, I don't care if he's 26 years old. I don't care if he's an Olympic wrestler with one-punch power. If he gets touched, he's going to keep going out. And is he skilled? Yes. Can he make a push if, he doesn't get chinned like this and maybe goes to the takedown and tires Lerone? And yeah, certainly. But he's just not doing, a good game plan in some of these fights to lead and conduce towards success. Like when he fought Henry Corrales the second time, perfect example. The first time when he fought Henry Corrales was a lot like with the Lerone Murphy fight. He comes forward, he wants to get into a brawl, and he wants to get that knockout and impress everybody at Madison Square Garden, right? He gets knocked out, flatlined, because he's too aggressive. Last weekend, similar situation. But in the second fight with Corrales, he takes him down, plays no business, and ground and pounds him in the first round. It's like you have to do kind of like what Hamzat was doing, and you have to take your skills to the fight, and you have to use them, right? So I want to see Aaron Pico, if he comes back, use that wrestling. Everybody talks about the Olympic wrestling. He's one of the greatest high school wrestlers in the country. Whatever the accolades are, they don't matter if he doesn't come and use them, in my opinion. So I'd like to see him continually use those takedowns and maybe go for the 3rd and 4th takedown attempt, kind of like we see some of these Caucasus region guys do. But Pat, I think it leads to a bigger discussion here about American wrestling with Bo Nickel, Aaron Pico, and we're going to talk about Gable Stevenson here in a minute. But American wrestling, is not necessarily done that well on the highest stage here recently. Bo Nickel lost. Aaron Pico, again, didn't use his wrestling and lost. What do you kind of make of that and, where Aaron Pico's career is, going trajectory-wise?
I don't know. That's an interesting one. American wrestling is in a weird spot right now for sure. I don't know if I can think of the best American wrestling prospect just
really
off the top of my head right now. Like in the UFC, I really can't say oh, this guy's
Cejudo?
I don't know.
Cejudo
No,
sticking around?
like prospect, like guys coming up even.
Oh,
Like, like
yeah,
who's the next big guy? Like who's the next, I don't know.
yeah.
There's definitely someone I'm like just like blanking on, but you're right. There's definitely an issue there. And just for like I said, for a guy like Pico's future, I'm just worried with that his chin, those weird movements he does that gets him in dangerous positions that his chin can't bail him out of, you know? Just I'm worried about what his future is in the UFC. I'm worried about certain matchups, like even like guys who I think he's on a different level on. Let's get the throw name out there. Steve Garcia, who I think is a very good fighter. But I'd say Pico is on a different level skill wise. I can't confidently pick Pico over Steve Garcia anymore because Steve Garcia
Yeah,
could
I can't either.
very well hit him with something that chins him.
He can crack. Yeah.
And that's the problem. Certain matchups now are a lot more risky than I would have thought they were because these issues are still there from earlier in his career.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And one thing I do want to talk about, though, Pat, is that these guys who have came over from Bellator, Patricio Pitbull, Patchy Mix, and now Aaron Pico, they've been thrown to very hard stylistic matchups. Yair Rodriguez was the worst matchup you can give Patricio Pitbull, right? We were there when he fought Sergio Pettis, and that was a guy who fought 125 pounds, and he technically kickboxed from the outside. When you put one of the best technical kickboxers in Yair against him, we all knew what was going to happen, right? We love Pitbull, but it was the reality of the situation. When you throw Patchy Mix in there to a guy, it's hard for him to take down and utilize his ground game like Mario Batista. It's going to be hard for him to find success. And then when you throw a guy like Aaron Pico, who's supposed to fight Movsar Evloev, everybody was very interested about that matchup because if Evloev couldn't get the fight to the ground, they favored Pico on the feet. We could see why last weekend. But on short notice here, 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it was out, Pico has to change to a completely different opponent in Lerone Murphy, a completely different style that is really not conducive towards success for him. Do you think that Dana White is getting these guys beat intentionally on their way into the door to show that the UFC is a different level, or do you just think these guys are losing fights?
Hell no. I think it's such an overblown argument, to be honest. I think it's like don't get me wrong. I think he's giving them what they're asking for. The Bellator guys have been saying for years, we can compete with the UFC guys. We're just as good. We're on the same level, if not better. He's giving them what they're asking for. He's not giving them bad matchups, not giving them anyone in the top 5 is probably going to be a bad matchup. And no, you're not going to give them the stylistic gift of a matchup in their debut most of the time if you're giving them a top of 5 opponent, If they're fighting a guy that's just outside the rankings or something, it might be different. But when you're fighting guys in the top 5 and top 8, whatever that is, you're not going to be getting these stylistic gifted matchups because there really isn't a lot of them, they're not available. So I feel like, and like I think we talked about this, but Pico, favorite. Patchy was a favorite. Pitbull was an underdog, that was a rough matchup for even prime Pitbull. That would have been a rough matchup, but for an older Pitbull even especially. But
he wasn't as big of a dog as what we thought.
No, exactly. He wasn't a big dog at all, and the other two were favorites. So I don't think so. I don't think he's trying to get these guys beat intentionally at all. Because if he was, we would have been seeing it and saying it. We would have been like, "Whoa, this is something bad." No, we both said Pico could beat Lerone Murphy, and we saw why he could on Saturday. Just we saw why he couldn't as well.
Yeah, well said there, Pat. Congratulations to Lerone Murphy, who, in the grand scheme of things, is probably next for Alexander Volkanovski. There's been some back and forth there on Twitter. But after this highlight reel knockout that is in the contention for knockout of the year, I don't know how you don't go with Lerone Murphy next. Undefeated fighter from Britain. I think it's a great matchup with him and Volkanovski. Volkanovski's a guy who's been knocked out before, and now they can show this spinning elbow knockout on all the highlight reels leading up in the pay-per-view packages. It could be pretty great. What do you think of that matchup, though, between him and Volkanovski? I like it a lot.
I like it. I think it's interesting at this point because I don't know. I know where Volkanovski stands. I don't know where he fully stands, though, I guess. I know that's weird, but we saw him against Diego. He was still Volk. He was still good. But there was things wrong with that performance, for sure. That wasn't the same Volk. So does a guy like Lerone take advantage of that style? I could see it. I could very well see it. But I want to say I feel like Volk will be able to mix it up well enough and avoid the big shot and probably win. But I'd have to look at that one a bit closer because it is a tricky matchup on both sides.
Yeah, I think so too. But pure striker, I don't know if Volk's really fought someone, that's as good as Lerone Murphy outside of the champions, obviously Makhachev and the guys who knocked him out. But, great matchup there between a technical striker and a well-rounded fighter in Volkanovski. That is going to be a matchup to watch moving forward. But there was also another incredible knockout, and Carlos Prates was the first guy to do it in Chicago, the spinning elbow knockout over Jeff Neal in round one. As the bell basically sounded, Pat, this was an incredible knockout, and Carlos Prates continues his move up the welterweight division here. For Jeff Neal, he was out for a considerable amount of time. 32 significant strikes landed for Carlos Prates in that first round, 17 of which went to the head of Jeff Neal. Jeff Neal landed 26 strikes of his own, did his best to keep Carlos Prates away from him at range. Carlos showed a lot of pressure in that first round, trying to back Jeff Neal up to the cage there and use his length and, very dominant strikes like he has. What did you think of the performance by Carlos Prates? Obviously smoking the cigarette in the press conference afterwards as well, the trademark from Prates.
Yeah, who came out? Was it Lerone? He was like, "Why does it smell like cigarettes?"
Dana did too.
Like
Yeah,
Dana too. Yeah, okay. But yeah, so I think what everyone else thought. I mean, I was just like, what just happened? Like, whoa, like that was like, don't get me wrong.
I missed it. I looked away in the building. I don't know what the fuck I was looking at, but I looked away and Jeff Neal's laying on the canvas and everyone's screaming. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I didn't miss the second left in the round.
1 second left in the round. I don't blame you. You probably just looked away for a second, thinking the bell was about to ring, and it did. But when it did, Jeff's face was on the floor, and it was like, what the hell, man? So yeah, no, I mean, what a KO. What a KO from Carlos Prates. I mean, we knew, but we had a feeling he was probably going to take out Jeff Neal in this fight. I think a lot of people did. I think he was one of the more confidently bet people on the card in general, and just confidently picked fighters on the card in general. Not even because of Jeff Neal, but just because of him, and him getting a bounce back win. And I mean, he did it in Carlos Prates fashion, like that spinning elbow was just so perfect. He set it up with the regular elbow, he threw the right elbow and then just spun with the other one. Beautifully set up. And I don't know. I mean, Carlos Prates he's obviously a top 10 guy at welterweight, but we saw him against Ian Gary.
I was going to ask you,
the way the fight went was so weird.
Yeah, his style is weird too. It's hard to get a guy in there that how do you train for Carlos Prates? How do you get a guy in sparring that comes in that's a lengthy southpaw like that can throw spinning elbows, has one punch power, the Muay Thai? It's a hard matchup. But for Prates, he's now 5-1 in his UFC career, and all 5 of those fights have come by knockout when he has won. The lone loss, obviously, to Ian Gary. Was that a split decision, or was that a unanimous decision, 3-2 there to Ian?
Unanimous very close decision, fight. I want to say that was.
Yeah, it was. That was a very close fight, 3-2 there. So Prates for me is really one of the up-and-comers of this welterweight division, and maybe the most entertaining and fan-friendly style that we have at 170 pounds moving up. Is there anybody specifically you would like to see him fight next? I know he called out Leon Edwards in the cage in Brazil. I'd love to see that matchup. I think that Edwards kind of needs tested by a striker. He's faced a lot of grapplers recently, with Bilal Muhammad and then Sean Brady. So I think that throwing him to a striker would kind of be a fresh matchup for Leon Edwards. And I think this would be very entertaining for the fans in Brazil. What do you think about that matchup?
I mean, I just think either way, Leon Edwards is screwed, right? He's being called out by Michael Morales and Carlos Prates. What does Leon Edwards do right now?
I'd rather fight Morales if I was him, honestly. I think that there's less tools in the shed for Morales. He's got a big right hand. He's a good athlete, but Prates is a terrible matchup for him.
I think they're both terrible matchups for him at this point, to be honest. It's like, but that's the thing. It's like, I don't know. I think one of those two fights needs to happen, though. I do think Leon should fight one of these up-and-coming Brazilians. I just don't know which one they will actually book him against. But, I mean, just Prates, man, like, he's on a 3-6-9-11 fight knockout streak.
Yeah, bro. When he wins, he's winning violently.
Obviously, he didn't win the Gary fight, but winning-wise, his last 11 wins all come by knockout. His last 11 wins are all knockouts. Like, you gotta like understand this guy is probably one of the most dynamic finishers we've seen at welterweight ever. It's just how many guys can he really finish at this point? Because we saw he got close with Gary, but he couldn't do it. So maybe he can't finish the top 5 guys, but can he finish the guys that are right outside? Can he finish a Michael Morales? It's an interesting.
What would you think if they threw him? What would you think if they threw him to like a Randy Brown or a Steven Wonderboy Thompson?
Well, I know they were talking about like Daniel Rodriguez. They were talking about Daniel Rodriguez. They said he's probably going to get a step down in competition. I don't know if you saw that. He has one more fight on his contract left up, and they said they probably wouldn't want to fight a top level fight on that contract that he's on right now. They'd want to work out a new one. So they said that they might want to take a fight. They said that they might want to take a fight down. So if they do, a guy like D-Rod or a guy like Wonderboy, like those fights are all very possible, him fighting down. So any of those matchups are possible, and I think he probably wins all of them at this point. I think he's too dynamic for a lot of those guys. It's way too dynamic.
Yeah, I think the only matchups he's really got to worry about are the grapplers, the Sean Brady's, the Rachmanovs, those type of guys moving forward. I think that's the stylistic matchup that's going to give Carlos Prates some problems, but congratulations to him on the win last weekend. I hope we get to see him in Brazil versus Leon Edwards. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, though, fight fans, including the Michael Venom Page versus Jared Cannonier matchup and Kaya Sakura over Tim Elliott. Michael Venom Page really put on a show there in the first round, right? He had 2 knockdowns against Cannonier early. Cannonier would come in. We knew that Cannonier was going to try and pressure, and it was going to be a Matador Bull situation. And he stung Cannonier twice, knocked him down early in that second round. And then he kind of coasted to a victory, right? In the second round, midway through, he technically kickboxed him from the outside. Cannonier came back at the end of the second round, but wasn't quite necessarily enough to win the round. And then I did have that third round for Cannonier, right? I thought Cannonier rebounded well in the second half of that fight, but he just got off to such a lead, Michael Venom Page did, that there was just too little. Jared Cannonier would have had to do a 10-8 round or something.
When did we see that? MVP's last fight against Shara.
Yep.
He got out to a 2-0 lead and then let Shara work his way back into it in round 3. But at that point, as long as he didn't get knocked out, it didn't matter, Yeah. So this is what MVP's kind of building this reputation now of getting up early and then being okay with being up early, which isn't a great reputation to be building. It's definitely not something to want to be known for, So I think we need to see an MVP knockout in the UFC. I think that's what we need. We've seen him drop Holland. We've seen him drop Cannonier. He pieced up Shara, didn't drop him, but that's fine. He was ripping Gary up on the feet, in my opinion. Like I thought he was well on his way to like potentially KOing Gary if Gary didn't get that fight to the ground. So I think his striking has looked incredible in the UFC. It's more just we need to see that knockout to remind us of who Michael Venom Page is. And there's a lot of weird matchups that you can make for him. I really don't know. It seems like he's interested more in like weird matchups than a title fight, I guess. But I guess like I don't know. We can see a lot with him. I just want to see him in a matchup that's going to get him a finish if possible, probably, or maybe even get him finished.
Yeah, like you said, MVP's all over the place, man. We've seen him at 170 pounds versus Ian Gary, like you mentioned, and this weekend we saw him at 185. Just like he was against Shara Magomedov. He's got 2 wins since coming up to 185, hasn't lost up here. If he stays at 185, Pat, I think that the matchup that's going to conduce a knockout, like you're saying, and also be fan-friendly is Paulo Costa. Him versus Paulo Costa would be fireworks, in my opinion, because Costa's going to come forward on him. He's going to look to do what he always does and land a big knockout blow. But MVP is going to be there, and a lot like I think Izzy was with Paulo, we're going to have a similar stylistic matchup to how that ends. And I think that he would get the best of Paulo Costa or have a good chance of doing it. Would you like to see MVP at 185 pounds or 170 before we move on to Tim Elliott?
I'd like to see that fight. You've just convinced me personally to see that fight because, like you said, Costa is going to run into MVP and not give him the room to work that we're used to seeing, and we're going to have to see if MVP is able to kind of keep him off or not. But I do think that fight would likely produce a finish. If not, it would probably just be more exciting, I'd imagine, but maybe not. I don't know. I like that fight, though. So, yeah, I'm for that fight.
Yeah, I like that fight a lot, too. Hopefully it's made. That would be Michael Venom Page versus Paulo Costa. But Tim Elliott gets a career, rebound. Good God, a layoff. Comes in here and finishes 2-division champion from Rising, Kaya Sakura. Everybody talks about Asakura being this can't-miss prospect. He comes over and gets submitted by Pantoja. In his second fight, he gets thrown a journeyman from The Ultimate Fighter, former title contender, and Tim Elliott. No disrespect there. Tim Elliott is a veteran and as tough as they come. He's fought everyone there is to fight in this sport, including Demetrius Johnson. And that experience was too much on fight night. Tim Elliott, to me, Patrick, just seemed like he was in the zone, in a groove in this fight. He comes out for the second round and he dolphin dives like he's going into a pool. He's just like a kid having fun out there. That's where he wanted to be. He wouldn't have rather have been any place in the world. And for Kaya Sakura, I think there was a lot of nerves coming into this fight. It's not the same nerves as a title fight, but it's the nerves of, I've got to beat Tim Elliott. If I don't beat Tim Elliott, what do I look like to these guys who just took a big chance on me, bringing me over here? So there was a lot of pressure, and I think the pressure was on Kaya Sakura in this matchup. But after losing to Tim Elliott and getting finished in back-to-back fights, I'm sorry. I want to see him go back to Japan. I don't think he's good enough to compete over here. And there is a style that is going to absolutely give him problems. If Tim Elliott is taking you down, or if you're getting forced to take a fight down and running into a guillotine from Tim Elliott, and Pantoja is getting you out of there in 2 rounds, I know you come over here and try and kamikaze the thing, kill or be killed. I'm going to knock you out, or you're going to sub me. That's basically how his fights go. But there's a litany of grapplers in this division that are going to do just that. And Tim Elliott showed us last weekend.
I mean, well said. I mean, that's just the big problem. I want to look for the exact post, but I saw his coach say something after the fight, and it was just like, you're not going to be able to get away with weak wrestling in the UFC or something like that, And it was just like, yeah, that should be known. You know what I mean? Like, you should that should have been the thing you guys have pushed so much on him, and it just feels like I don't know. I'm not saying he's being taken in the wrong direction by his coaches or anything. It's just it feels like more there should be improvements here in the grappling. There's not at all. There's really just has been no improvements since he's came over. You figure for Pantoja, he would have improved. Figure for this fight, he would have improved on the grappling, and hasn't been there. I personally said before this fight that I thought the odds were off and that I thought Kaya Sakura should have been a bigger favorite. I was wrong. I was very wrong because obviously he shouldn't have been. I was watching this fight like, what the hell is what is happening right now? Kai was just standing there staring. Once Tim showed him that the fight could go to the ground, it's like he froze and completely forgot the fact that he needed to strike to win. And it was like, to me, it was just like, what am I watching? Like, this guy is supposed to be throwing bombs. Like Kai's not a volume guy, right? Kai is a power guy. So he needs to be throwing power shots most of the time, right? He was just standing there staring. Like, he wasn't throwing volume, he wasn't throwing power, he wasn't throwing anything. Once Tim Elliott showed him that he could get the fight to the ground, it's like Asakura was like, whoa, I don't know what to do now. And then froze, got out. I thought he got outstruck on the feet in the second round, and then
I was just going to say he got outstruck by the totals overall in total strikes 42 to 38 and significant strikes 27 to 21. So you're not in the wrong direction there.
No, and I really was like, I was just so shocked at the way that fight went. To be honest, I mean, it's Tim Elliott, so I guess I wasn't like that shocked because I know Tim Elliott is always capable of doing some underdog stuff right there. That's Tim Elliott, but. I thought Asakura was a lot better than that, man. I thought the bantamweight aspect, the fact that he fought at bantamweight in the past, I know Elliott did too, but Asakura was because he actually was that big. Elliott just moved around for fun. Like, I don't know if I want to see him go back to Japan, but I mean, I think this fight kind of proved to us that he's not a top 10 flyweight in the UFC. So if we're going to keep him around, we're going to market him as a maybe borderline ranked flyweight. Because to me, he didn't look like a ranked flyweight whatsoever in that fight.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't even say that. This guy just lost to Tim Elliott, who hadn't fought since 2023. And not only lost to him, Pat, I was going to mention earlier, he lost to his number one move. Everybody who's seen Tim Elliott fight knows the guillotine is his number one submission. He almost submitted Demetrius Johnson with it. It's like his patented move. And you're going to just dive in with your head over there like you don't know what the guy's number one submission is. So I don't know. I thought that it was just...
Can I just bring up a list to you real quick? Just very quickly. Tim
But
Elliott
he's beaten Tiger Ulanbekov, who was, a big prospect too. So it's happened in the past.
Oh, no, it's happened in the past. But Tim Elliott, this was his 21st UFC fight, right? In the UFC, 21 fights, 10 wins. He only has 3 finishes in the UFC. not including Tough, not including his time on Tough. But he only has 3 finishes in the UFC. The other 2 were against Suma Derji and Mark De La Rosa. Now Kai Asakura is on that list. I think we expected more, I think we expected a bit more. Like, it's not even that he just lost either. He got finished, and it wasn't that hard for Tim Elliott. Like, it's not like
when
he went
was
through
Tim Elliott in trouble? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. When was Tim in trouble?
I mean, he got caught a couple times. Kai did land in round 1. Like, there were some good punches, but I don't know if he was ever very close to finishing a fight,
Yeah, no. He came out there, like I mentioned, and did a cartwheel to start the second round. He felt in the groove, and I think that it was because he landed that takedown at the end of round 1 and kind of saw the opening for the grappling, which he utilized in round 2. Great win for Tim Elliott. He's going to stick around the promotion. Hopefully he gets to continue moving up the rankings here. I don't know if he is necessarily a top 10 ranked fighter at this point, but I'd like to see him get a matchup in the top 15 to say the least moving forward. I think that he certainly deserves that over the last 2 finish wins that he has. Moving on to the prelims here briefly before we break down some other stuff and give you our predictions for this week. Suzurkayev, who a lot. You're Dana White Contender Series expert. He was on Tuesday, got a big win by knockout, and then brought back 4 days later against Eric Nolan from CFFC, I believe. Eric Nolan came in to bang. He put Suzurkayev in some really bad spots in that first round, and honestly, on the feet, I thought he got the better of Suzurkayev throughout the entire contest, but Suzurkayev eventually found the takedown and implemented the grappling to get the submission win there in round 2. I think this guy is a very talented prospect moving forward, but I think Eric Nolan really proved that he's UFC caliber as well.
I don't know how much it was Nolan catching him off guard and the short notice aspect and the 2 weight cuts in a couple days, but Suzurkayev having to resort to his wrestling to win the fight wasn't the best look for me, to be honest. He's a striker. Like, Suzurkayev does his striking. I mean, he has great wrestling, as we saw. I knew he had great wrestling. That's not what he relies on. He relies on his striking. So the fact that Nolan was giving him those issues on the feet, I mean, Nolan is a striker. He has some very heavy hands. I don't know if you saw his highlight reel before.
Crazy.
Yeah,
they're showing it up on the screen.
So Nolan puts dudes out. I mean, his hands are legit bricks. But at the same time, I did expect Suzurkayev to technically beat him on the feet and keep him at bay. So the fact that Nolan was able to get in the pocket and not only land a couple bombs, because I did expect that, but rock him and have him on skates. And, that did worry me a bit. So I honestly, I think as much as, it was awesome that he won back-to-back fights in 4 days and he did finish this fight and showed the wrestling, I am a little bit lower on Suzurkayev than I was coming off his Contender Series performance, to be honest with you.
That makes sense. And, I'm really high on Eric Nolan now. Not necessarily that he could be this, world-beating fighter in the world, but I think he can put on a lot of entertaining matchups, especially in this division. So is he somebody that you think sticks around in middleweight or makes that move to welterweight at some point?
No, he'll drop right back down to welterweight. I think there was just this.
He could be a legit prospect at welterweight.
He very well could be. I think he's just. I think he's going to, like you said, I think he's going to be in a lot of entertaining fights. I think he's going to knock a lot of people out, and that's where I think Eric Nolan is going to shine in the UFC, is in matchups where he gets to go to war and just show off his power. I think that's where we'll see him shine.
Well said, Pat. Is there any fight on this card that you think that we should touch on before we move into the news and breakdown for next week?
Just real quick, I did want to touch on 2 quick fights. The tough finale, Joseph Morales looked incredible against Olivier Diris. He came in as a massive underdog. He was an underdog. He would have been an underdog if there were betting lines. He would have been an underdog in all 3 of his tough fights. His first round, second round, and the finale, right? He dominated 2 of them and submitted 2 of them. The other one was a very controversial decision, but not his fault. He did what he had to do and just got the nod. He really impressed me. He beat my 2 favorites, and then one of my next 2 favorites. And so he beat 3 of my top 4 flyweights from the season. He wasn't even in my top 4 flyweights on the season. He was my number 5, and he beat 3 of the top 4. So he ran through the gauntlet, did exactly what he needed to do, and didn't respect Adiris at all. Just walked through him. It looked like Adiris was completely off his game. He did not look the same. Not to discredit Morales' performance, but Adiris just did not look good in that fight, and Morales gave him no room to breathe. So really impressive win for Joseph Morales. I'm really happy and really interested to see where he goes at flyweight because this is a second chance now. So good for him. And then, I mean, Alex Hernandez clipping Chase Hooper, that was so sick. I mean, a lot of people didn't
Yeah,
expect
it
that.
was.
I didn't expect that.
Chase Hooper is such a big favorite.
He was way too big of a favorite, honestly. I think Hernandez's issue has always been his chin, right? Like that's been his big issue.
Other strikers, yeah.
And I was looking at it, and I remember we talked about this before the fight. Hernandez doesn't get taken down a lot in fights. You know, people don't submit him and take him down easily. And I brought this up, and that was part of the reason why I picked Hooper decision, because I didn't think he was going to be able to get Hernandez out of there. And I thought he may struggle to take him down at times. He didn't even try to take him down. I think maybe one time, and Hernandez shrugged him off and then just clipped him at the end of round one and got that finish. Massive win for Alex Hernandez. Kind of puts him right back in the mix of, like, you know, maybe a fight or two away from being ranked after, you know, a really bumpy career. So I know he's not young, but he's not necessarily old either. He's only 32. So, like, Hernandez on a 3-fight winning streak now, maybe we're seeing some kind of resurgence there. I don't know, but this was an incredible performance from him.
Listen, man, when he came in and I believe he debuted against Beneil Dariush and knocked him out. Mm-hmm. And when he did that, they just kind of had to throw him to the wolves. They're like, all right, you can hang in the deep end of the pool. And then, you know, he had to get experience in the top level and had a lot of losses in there to guys that, you know, he was a favorite to beat, and people were really high on him. Maybe now he's turning that next stage in his career. And like we mentioned last week on the show, we thought he had a legitimate chance if he could stop the takedown, because he does have legit knockout power. He does have good hands. He's a good athlete. Listen, he's a world-class boxer. No. Is he going to get got sometimes against guys who are technically better than him? Yes. But against these grapplers like Chase Hooper, you know, it's going to be a hard matchup, especially if you can't get the fight to the ground. So great win for Alexander Hernandez. What did you think about Michael Ołechczyk versus Gerald Meerschaert? Gerald really couldn't get anything going in that matchup, and it was one-way traffic for Ołechczyk. But I thought it was a good learning step from him from his last fight with Holland, because when he rocked Holland, and we talked about this, and he went to the ground, Holland was able to submit him and get him and reverse him in a weird, tricky situation. Gerald's good at those situations, but this time Michael Ołechczyk just forced Gerald to stand up, told the referee to get him to stand, didn't go to the ground and try and finish the fight. What did you think about Ołechczyk? I thought that he really learned from his last performance.
Well, what you said, he very much proved that he learned something, at least, because he didn't just jump right on Gerald. He dropped him, stayed calm, dropped him again, saw that he was really hurt, and then jumped for the finish and did get it. Kind of just went the way I did expect. You know, I said, you know, it was going to be Ołechczyk with a quick KO or Meerschaert with a not late, but later, like second roundish sub. And I did favor the Ołechczyk KO just because of his power, and the guys that beat him usually beat him fairly quick, you know, with better grappling, I'd say. So, you know, I felt like it was a good matchup for him. I felt like he was able to crack Meerschaert's chin, and it didn't surprise me too much. I'm more just like, I need to see Ołechczyk with the fighting nerds really, like, I need to see where he really stands with his grappling now, because he can't lose certain fights the way he has in the past with the grappling. So if he can work on that with the power he has in his hands, I mean, I've always liked him a lot. So I'm really interested to see where he can go from here.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. He's given away fights that he's won and rocked people in, like we talked about with Holland and you know, previously in the past other than that. And when he's with Kai Barallo now, he's going to be able to train with a legitimate jiu-jitsu and grappling guy every single day and shore up some of those loose ends in his own game. So I think that Michael Ołechczyk moving forward is going to be the best that we've seen him at in his career. But we got to get on to the news for this week. And Pat, you're there live on site in Las Vegas covering DWCS, Dana White Contender Series. And you'll be there from week 2 until I believe the end of the month, right?
Oh, no, week 6. I'll be week 2 to week 6.
So make sure to check out Pat Danna's social media if you want that in-depth breakdown of coverage there that only he is getting as a credentialed media member. Pat, we had a litany of batch of guys get brought in last Tuesday, including Josh Hokett, who me and you have covered his pro debut at Bellator. What did you think about the guys that they brought over on Tuesday, and who are some of the standouts for you that you think are going to be able to progress in their UFC career fairly well?
Well, what did I tell you? I did tell you I thought we were going to get like 4 contracts, 4 finishes, and we did get 4 finishes that night. So I was very happy with my prediction because I did think that it was going to be a more exciting night, and I think it did deliver.
Yeah.
Great night, great fights. I love Jose Delano. I know he was the only one that didn't get a finish. He's been talked about for a really long time. His only loss in the last 10 plus years is to Gabriel Santos. And if you watch him in every fight, he looked so good. He looked so good. And then the Santos fight, Santos is a very good fighter. I'm very high on Gabriel Santos. And Santos just did what he had to do to neutralize him, And he forced Delano to get reckless, which he doesn't usually do. Delano is one of the better prospects at 145 that wasn't signed to the UFC. Dana's high on him. Nick Maynard's high on him. I'm high on him. I know a lot of people that are as well. And I think he's probably one of the better prospects they'll end up bringing on from the season in general. I was very impressed with Cam Rouston. I thought his striking looked career best. I thought that knockout was amazing. He's not a guy known for his knockouts at all. I wasn't expecting him to finish this fight on the feet with his hands. He proved me wrong for sure. And starched Brandon Holmes. It was a very impressive win. Lewis Lee Scott did the job. He missed weight by half a pound. Needed to get a finish. Was up, not even up actually. It was 1-1 after 2 rounds on most judges' scorecards, and he did get that 3rd round finish impressively. Hokett just kind of ran through Uriel there. I knew Uriel didn't have a lot of cardio, so if Hokett was going to be able to get the rest of them going early, we saw what happened. And Ramiro Jimenez was very fun. He 2-year layoff, so he got rocked a little bit early. He did have to eat some shots to be able to wake up and get the finish. But overall, I think Delano is definitely the top one to look out for. Hokett, because of the heavyweight division, I think his wrestling and athleticism is interesting for the heavyweight division. But Lewis Lee Scott and Rouston had very, very solid striking performances, and I thought that they both looked really good. So if I had to rank them, I guess I'd say like Delano, Scott, and then Jimenez, Hokett, Rouston, if I had to rank the 5 on how I think they do in the UFC.
Yeah, I like those rankings a lot. I think that there's a lot of promise for Delano. And then, as you mentioned with Hokett, a tremendous athlete at heavyweight who we've seen professional athletes come over in the past, like Greg Hardy, Austin Lane, and some other guys. But I think that Josh Hokett, with that wrestling background, and we have already seen some submissions that he's pulled off on the regional scene, I think that he's going to be a good athlete and a good contender here. When you look at a guy like Waldo Acosta-Cortez, who we're going to talk about here moving forward, he pitched for the Cincinnati Reds 5 years ago. This is not a guy who grew up necessarily in a Taekwondo or karate dojo learning how to fight. This is a tremendous athlete, and we're going to talk about him against Pavlovich here in a minute. But I kind of see Josh Hokett from that same style and that same cloth, but I think he might be an even better athlete than Waldo Cortez. Now, I know he has a big right hand. He comes from baseball. He hits powerful, but there are different skill sets for each. But I think Hokett is going to stick around in the UFC for quite a while.
Yeah, no, and I think that even though I did rank Hokett 4th in my overall rankings there for this week, that's more of a like skill for skill, pound for pound kind of ranking. Because Hokett's in that heavyweight division, we can see him hit the top 15 in 2 fights. We can never, we may not, even though Lewis Lee Scott is number 2 and Ramiro's number 3 on my list, that's based on the performances and the impressiveness of them. Those guys might never be ranked in their respective weight classes. Hokett could be ranked in 2 fights just because it's heavyweight. So I do want people to consider that into account too when I say that.
Absolutely. And now there are 2 big announcements that have came from the mixed martial arts world. One is the matchup that we mentioned earlier between Fluffy Hernandez and RDR. What do you think about this, Pat? 2 grapplers going against one another. Fluffy Hernandez comes in about 6'1". Ranier DeRitter is one of the biggest middleweights that I've seen. They say he's 6'4". I saw him in Iowa. He's every bit of 6'4", maybe 6'5". What do you think about this matchup? I think it's very interesting. But because they're both grapplers, I could very easily see this fight being nullified on the ground, which forces them to strike and exchange with one another. We kind of see that with grapplers sometimes, especially jiu-jitsu guys. The juice might not be worth the squeeze going to the ground, so we get a striking affair instead. What do you think about this matchup, and how excited are you? And do you think that it is the legit, no questions asked, number 1 contenders fight at middleweight?
No to that because of Baralho versus Imavov. I have to say that they're playing the who has a more impressive performance game. You know, they're going to play that game, which is fine. I'm fine with that if that's how they want to do it because any of these guys winning, they all deserve title shots. You know, so it's kind of one of those things where it's all right to me. But if you want me to be honest, my early thoughts on it, and I very well could be off here, and I might not feel this way by the time the fight rolls around, but just watching what Fluffy just did to Dolidze, I think Fluffy might just steamroll RDR too. To be quite honest with you, I'm a little bit worried that this isn't going to be a competitive fight because, I mean, we saw RDR beat Whitaker in these grappling situations, but we also saw a lot of them be competitive. You know, I think
Yeah.
we talked about this after Hernandez's win. I think Hernandez would probably dust Whitaker in the grappling at this point. You know, and not to MMA math it, but I just think grappling wise, I think Hernandez's physicality might be a little too much for RDR. I think he might end up getting RDR on his back in this fight a bit, or just kind of wear him down in the clinch or something like that. I could very well see it. And even in the striking on the feet, if I remember correctly, one of my biggest worries about RDR earlier in his UFC, not earlier in his UFC career, still earlier in his UFC career, but earlier on and right before he was in the UFC, was his chin, his defense. He doesn't have great stand-up defense. We saw it against Whitaker. Whitaker rocked him there and almost took him out. I don't love his defense.
Yeah.
He gets hit, he gets rocked, you know, and he doesn't
Because
react
he's
well
so
to
tall,
being
his
hit.
head movement is necessarily on par. I feel like he, a lot of the times because of his height, makes up for some of those shots that don't reach him. So the head movement isn't necessarily on par with some of those other guys in the division.
But to your point about the nullifying the wrestling, if the wrestling in this fight is nullified, I still may even favor Fluffy on the feet. We've seen Fluffy throw some high volume, powerful hands lately in his past couple of fights. I've been very impressed with what I've seen from Fluffy on the feet. And I may even favor Fluffy on the feet overall. But the scariest thing, I will say, the scariest thing is I think Fluffy's a bit soft to the body. We've seen it against Holland. We've seen it in a couple fights now where Fluffy might be a little bit soft to the body. That was one of the reasons people were picking Dolidze over him. Dolidze's body kicks potentially causing a big problem for Fluffy. The body knees that we just saw RDR break down Robert Whitaker and Bo Nickel with. He could easily break down Anthony Hernandez with those if this fight goes a bit and doesn't hit the floor for a lot of it. So even in the clinch, if Hernandez is controlling him in the clinch, RDR's knees to the body might end up paying off in the long run. So that's
I
that's
think
where
it's
I
really
find
the
this
length.
very interesting.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the pressure and cardio of Anthony Hernandez, I feel like will lead him to success on the feet, but he's also got to be wary of the knees in the clinch and the length of RDR. It's a great matchup. I can't wait for it to happen. But Patrick, we have now had announced the last hope for American wrestling. Gable Stevenson, former Olympic champion. We saw him in the national championships get beat by a guy, I think his name was Wyatt Hendrickson. He will make his MMA debut at the LFA card on September 12th. I don't know the exact number. You guys can look that up, but you can go to the LFA Instagram account and learn all those information and details. He's fighting a guy named Braden Peterson, who is 1-0. Now, I don't know much about his opponent, but obviously Gable Stevenson is a very high prospect. We don't get Olympic gold medalists over here in mixed martial arts very often. Henry Cejudo comes to mind. But I don't know if we've really had that many outside of Henry. Sarah McMahon was a silver medalist. We have Kayla Harrison obviously was a judo two-time Olympic gold medalist there. But this is a big deal, and he's a guy who, if he gets 2 to 3 fights, we probably could see on the Contender Series and someone you'll be covering in very, very short order like we did Bo Nickel. And for the heavyweight division right now, he's trained with guys like Gordon Ryan. He's trained with guys like John Bones Jones. He is an elite athlete. We've seen him in the NFL. We've seen him in the WWE. Not that that necessarily means anything in the competitive grand scheme of things, but he is a good athlete. He's staying in shape, and he's somebody who's a lot better athlete than everybody we have right now in the heavyweight division. So if he can come in and implement that wrestling style that he has, it's going to be a throwback to the days of Brock Lesnar and Shane Carwin if he finds success in the UFC. How hyped are you for the debut of Gable Stevenson?
Gable Stevenson's debut is going to be very interesting. I mean, I know it's been talked about for a while. I want to see how he can take a punch first, but I'm very intrigued with what could potentially come of Gable's debut. We need heavyweight prospects, right? I mean, sport needs heavyweight prospects. We've signed 4. I don't know if you realize we've signed 4 heavyweight prospects to the UFC within the past, I think it's 24 hours.
Really?
Well, they just announced a new heavyweight fight on Perth. 2 new heavyweight fights on Perth. One of the Taffa brothers is fighting Louis Sutherland, former PFL fighter and coming over from LFL. And the DWCS fight for next week between Brando Pericic and Elijah Ellison was moved to UFC Perth as well because Pericic represents Australia. So we now have had 3 there, and then Josh Hokett from the Contender Series. So we've now, in the last 24 hours, had 4 heavyweights technically just signed to the UFC roster. So they're obviously making a push. I mean, they cut Budai, they've cut some guys.
Rosenstruck, yeah.
Yeah, that were questionable cuts. And it seems like now we're starting to get that fill-in of new talent at heavyweight. But I'll be honest with you, I think we could do better so far. I think there's a couple other names that they could sign.
Where's Rico Verhoeven?
I don't know.
I mean, everybody's been talking about Rico Verhoeven, the kickboxing world champ, for fucking forever, Get him in the
but they've been talking about him versus Francis. I don't know what's happening with that. I doubt he ever comes over, but that would be fun.
I'm covering the PFL here in Miami this week, and I do not think that Francis is going to be fighting anybody in the PFL moving forward, quite honestly. But
well, that's not surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it's like people are asking questions about it, and people are just kind of like it's. I don't know. I don't know who they're going to have him fight. If Romanov and Popov, we'll talk about that matchup here in a minute, but if Romanov and Popov win, they've been asked if they want to fight him, and they're like, yeah, we'll fight him. We just don't know if he's going to show up to fight us, or wants to fight us. So it's very interesting. But we have a lot of fights to break down here this week. The MMA world never stops. We got predictions and analysis coming at you right here for the PFL and UFC this week. PFL is in Miami here at the Hard Rock Seminole in Florida. And in the main event, we've got an entertaining middleweight matchup between Dalton Rasta and Fabian Edwards, 2 former Bellator ranked fighters in the 185-pound division will now fight for $500,000 and a world title come tomorrow night. There will be 3 world titles up on the line. We will talk about those other 2 matchups after this, but there's been some bad blood between Dalton Rasta and Fabian Edwards. Fabian Edwards accusing him of steroid usage, and among other things. They're back and forth. Fabian didn't want to leave the weigh-ins. They're shit-talking each other in each other's face. What do you think about this matchup? How excited are you for Dalton Rasta and Fabian Edwards? I was a little surprised that they had never previously fought each other coming over from Bellator. And now I guess is the greatest time as ever for these 2 to finally meet. I'm excited for the matchup. A very technical, good, athletic striker in Fabian Edwards versus a guy who has a college wrestling background from Youngstown State and is a tremendous athlete of his own. Muscles popping all over the place. So obviously accused of steroid use, but is tested clean. He's a clean athlete. He's been tested by USADA. He mentioned that in his response to us. You can find that on Cage Side Press Instagram page. But what do you think about this matchup? I'm not going to give a prediction which way I think this is going to go because I'm here covering it. But what do you think, Pat? You can give a prediction. I kind of broke it down from striker versus good athlete grappler as well. But we've seen Dalton Rasta, before I kick it over to you, fight Sadabusi, who is a technical striker earlier this season, and he was able to get a submission win there. We haven't seen too many finish wins from Rasta, but what do you think about this matchup with Edwards?
Yeah, no, that was definitely a very impressive performance from Rasta, but I do think this matchup may just be a little bit too much. I think Fabian's technical striking really does neutralize a lot of Rasta's strengths in this fight, and I feel like Rasta's he's improved. Like the Sadabu fight showed improvements, but we haven't seen Sadabu since. I don't know how to feel about Sadabu after that fight. I didn't think he won the Aaron Jeffrey fight personally, so that plays into my opinion too. I thought he looked better from the first fight to the second fight, but I still didn't think he won the second fight.
Yeah,
so
I didn't either.
It's one of those things where I think he improved, but I still don't think he improved. I don't know if he improved enough, is what I'm saying. And he might have, because the Sadabu fight, it did look like he did, but then it didn't enough in the Jeffrey fight. So with that said, I do think I favor the more experienced guy here, Fabian Edwards, who, like I said, I think he is a technically bad matchup for Rasta. But with that said, I mean, Fabian has lost to a guy, Austin Vanderford, who I think has a similar-ish style to Rasta. You know, I think they fight similarly enough to where if he can implement that kind of style and game plan, we could see him cause Fabian a lot of issues for sure.
Yeah, and Austin Vanderford's a name who I'd like to see fight in the UFC again. He had a very impressive debut, and I hope that he comes back here in relative short order. But another former
I'm pretty sure they booked him recently.
Okay, good. So we'll see him in the future. But as far as this matchup is concerned with Dalton Rasta and Fabian Edwards, one thing that I don't think a lot of people are talking about is this is the first 5-round fight in the career of Dalton Rasta. Fabian Edwards has challenged for a Bellator title twice, right? So he's somebody who's prepared for 25 minutes in the past. Dalton Rasta has never prepared for 25 minutes. And if you're talking about the technical striking of Fabian Edwards and going late, that's got to favor into the cardio of Fabian Edwards, doesn't it?
Well, 100%. And thank you for bringing that up because I didn't even remember to mention that. But in the third round of three of his last four that hit the third round, the Aaron Jeffrey fight, the first one, he crumbled in round three. We saw he kind of crumbled. The third round against Norbert Novenyi, I'm pretty sure he got beat up bad in that round.
He won that first round and second round, yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the judges scored that round a 10-8. The first fight was almost a draw because of how bad he lost round three. And then this AJ fight, I thought he lost round three as well again. So when these fights are hitting round three, he's not winning them recently against this level of competition. So in a 5-round fight, if this fight goes into rounds 3 and 4 and 5, you have to imagine Fabian Edwards would be the favorite to win if it even hits round 3, you know?
Yeah, certainly. So that's our analysis for the main event of the PFL tomorrow night from the Hard Rock Seminole in Miami, Florida. You can catch that main event on ESPN or ESPN Plus Thursday night. Now, there is 2 other matchups we'll quickly get to. The heavyweight matchup between Alexander Romanov and Oleg Popov. I think that Oleg Popov might be a little bit undersized in this one, right? He comes in about 230, 240 pounds. Both these guys are grapplers. I know that Popov has beaten guys bigger than him in the past, like Clinton Vassell, but he just lost by submission last time in the finals to Dennis Goltsov. Now, if Romanov can get this fight to the ground, I think he's going to have about a 30-pound advantage on fight night over Oleg Popov. So if he can end up on top in the grappling exchanges, I think that that's going to be some problems for Oleg. What do you think about that fight before we move on to talk about Sully and Carlos Jr.?
I think it's like a mirror match, to be honest with you. I think they're very similar fighters, very, very similar. I just think Romanov has better submission offense, and Popov has better ground and pound offense, you know, like once it hits the floor. I feel like they're very similar with their grappling, their control, even their striking. I don't think is that far off. I probably would favor Romanov slightly there. Like their cardio, you know, I think it's a very mirror match kind of fight. So what happened to Romanov? Did he not like?
He got kneed in the nuts in Chicago and got sent to the emergency room. He had to get stretchered out of the building.
Yeah, but there was no major injury there. Like that was my biggest concern.
No, I guess there was no surgery. He didn't mention any surgery. He said it took about 2 weeks for him to get back to full training.
Okay.
But yeah, it sounds like he's healthy and ready to go.
Okay, yeah, no, that was my biggest concern was like a potential injury lurking from that we had like, you know, not like that flew under the radar. I mean, maybe there is, you know, that he's just not saying something about.
That's true.
But that and something like that would be the difference maker in this fight for me because, like I said, it's such a mirror match. Like, I don't know how one guy is a decent favorite over the other. To be honest, the injury was crumbling. But no, I don't know how this guy will be. One guy is a decent favorite over the other, and if I'm not wrong, I think Popov is the favorite right now. I mean, the one thing that's making me pick Romanov here, which is what my pick will be, is Romanov. Is the UFC level competition. I think he's fought better competition overall, but I don't know if that will even make a difference in the end, you know? So give me Romanov here. I want to say just a sloppy 5-round decision, honestly, just because of how weird and close it's going to be. But honestly, I have no clue how this fight's going to go. I really think it's more mirror matchy, and because I think that one is probably going to run right through the other. But, you know, I do think they're very even.
So that's what we have on the co-main event. But there is also a third title fight on this card in the 205-pound division between Sullivan Cauley, the upstart former Bellator fighter who was a wrestler at Arizona State, he just got a big win over Phil Davis in the semifinals, propelling him to this matchup with 2021 winner Antonio Carlos Jr., who is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and has a very tricky submission game, especially off of his back. So this is something that for Sullivan Cauley, he's well aware of. On media day, he stated that he doesn't know if he necessarily even wants to take this fight to the ground. He might stand up and trade and try and knock out Antonio Carlos Jr. because he said that he's one of the only boxers in MMA that he thinks can go over and compete in professional boxing as well. He's a very confident guy. Last time out, he thought he had one of the best cardio in the entire world, and he'd never been to a decision before. So, he is one of these guys that kind of has a rational confidence in yourself, but that's what you need to be successful at the top level in mixed martial arts. And Sullivan Cauley, to me, is one of the brightest prospects we have at 205 pounds in the entire world. After that win over Phil Davis, he avenged the losses of his mentor, Ryan Bader, who obviously is in, not in his corner, but is giving him advice for this matchup as well against Antonio Carlos Jr. I think that Antonio Carlos Jr. is a bit old here. Sullivan Cauley is on his way up. Do you think that the experience of Antonio Carlos Jr., who has almost more than double the amount of professional fights over Sullivan Cauley, do you think that's going to matter a lot on fight night?
No, I think if you want me to be completely honest, I kind of think that Carlos Jr. kind of crawled to this championship. I really he lost to Polizzi last year, who is a guy that hasn't really gotten close to the championships here in the PFL. And then he wins a very close decision over Carl Moore. I watched that fight. I don't remember who I thought won. I just remember I thought it was close and that I thought Carl Moore fought really well. But I didn't remember picking a winner specifically. And then I honestly thought the Powell fight was just – I felt that watching that fight was just like all of like the what ifs that are negative about Simeon Powell came out and just showed at the same time and showed that he wasn't ready, and that he just wasn't what he could have been, I guess. And I really like I said, I think he's crawled to this final. I don't know how he's gotten here. I think he's been inactive. I think he's getting older. And I think a guy like Sully Cauley is just hungry enough, better than the guys he's fought this year in the tournament. Mm-hmm. And I think that the win over Phil Davis just gives him the ultra confidence to go out there and do what he needs to do to Antonio Carlos Jr. Because I think at this point, even though that fight with Phil Davis, controversial decision there, Cauley dropped him, right? Like Cauley looked good. Cauley had moments for sure. There's no argument. So
yeah, that was a hell of a fight.
I think Phil Davis is a better fighter at this point than Antonio Carlos Jr. So just that performance alone, I do really like that. And Antonio Carlos Jr.'s last loss is to the guy that Cauley knocked out in 90 seconds, Polizzi. So it's one of those things where I just think that this is the time for Cauley. He's looked great and he's finally hitting his stride. His cardio looked great last time out. That was the big question mark. He had never been out of round one. How's the cardio? Looked great. I have no real doubts here. I think Sully Cauley gets this done.
Yeah, Perlez, we just talked about that a little bit earlier. That was one of our news segments, was Gable Stevenson. I'm sure Eddie will actually be at that fight. He's actually covering the LFA this week. He does in-depth coverage for LFA on their fight night. So I'm sure that Eddie will be at Gable Stevenson's debut. We talked about it. We think he's one of the best athletes out there as a prospect in MMA. We don't see a lot of Olympic medalists come over. We mentioned Henry Cejudo, Kayla Harrison, and some of the others like Sarah McMahon. But for Gable Stevenson, he's kind of in a league of his own. If he can come over into the UFC and implement that wrestling game, he's going to, throw it back to shades of Brock Lesnar and Shane Carwin in previous years with that ground and pound, which we're presuming is how he's going to get the job done a lot of the time. So that's going to be a very interesting story to look at moving forward. But we do have a card from UFC China this week. That was our PFL coverage from Florida. Again, you can see that on ESPN Plus or ESPN tomorrow night. UFC is on at 2 a.m. in China with a main event between Johnny Walker and one sec here. God damn it. I just dropped my phone. Johnny Walker and Zhang Ming Yang. Now, Zhang Ming Yang has finished Anthony Smith. He's a guy who's got very powerful striking. He's a tough individual. He moves forward, kind of plots in the pocket. But Johnny Walker's chin has been suspect. Knocked out by Volkan Oezdemir, knocked out by Ankalaev. He can get the job done himself. He's a creative striker. I've seen videos of Johnny Walker in pure boxing sparring getting knocked out by 17-year-olds, Pat. Is this guy's chin just completely trashed and gone? I'm predicting that Ming Yang Zhang is going to get a big knockout at home here.
Setup fight for Zhang Mingyang to get a big knockout at home in front of his crowd, only grow his popularity. That's what this is. It's just a setup fight for him. Johnny Walker, I mean, his last you got to go back to look at his last 3 wins. It's Anthony Smith, Paul Craig, and Cutelaba. You want to go back even longer? It's Ryan Spann and Misha Serkinov. The only win on his resume that still really is impressive is Khalil Roundtree, and that was back when Roundtree was not who he is now. Roundtree was a lot different of a fighter back then. So honestly, like, you're just going back and looking at Walker's record, and he couldn't even finish that version of Anthony Smith. Remember? That was a decision. He brutalized Anthony Smith's legs and couldn't get him out of there. We saw Zhang Mingyang, just get that job done. So I do think Zhang Mingyang's got this fight. I think this is just perfect setup fight for him to just run through at home. And I do think he's going to put himself in some interesting spots here where Walker might be able to catch his chin. And he has been knocked out before, like earlier on in his career. So I think that will be interesting to keep an eye on. Like a Walker knockout here isn't out of the question just because Mingyang and his defense isn't as good as it could be. But, I mean, it's just such a setup fight. I have to roll with the guy that should definitely get the knockout win here.
Yeah, I'm going to roll with you. I also have Zhang by knockout. I think that, like you said, this is tailor-made for him to win at home. He plots forward. I believe the boxing is going to be on the side of Zhang as well as the power. Now, as far as Johnny Walker's chin's concerned, I think it's a big red flag for me if I'm going to be a bettor and put money on him. I think that if you're going to put money on somebody, you got to, have the ability to take a shot, especially if you're a bettor. You got to have kind of assuredness that person's going to be able to, take some punches, especially if they're in there with someone who hits like Zhang. So I'm going to take Zhang by knockout. I think he's probably going to get it done in the first round. If you guys want to put that in, I'm sure you can get odds better than minus 370, but currently Zhang is trending at minus 370, Johnny Walker at plus 280. So if you're on the side of Pat, Pat isn't taking him, but he says there is a path to victory for Johnny Walker. If you do believe there's a path to victory for him, you can make some money this weekend, plus 280 on the money line for Johnny Walker. Anything more you want to say about that?
I think, it's the best bet. Fight to end in round 1.
I think so too.
That just play it like that. I think that'll be the safest play, and I think it'll probably be better than a Mingyang money line. So I think that'll probably be the nicest play there for me.
Yeah, if they have an over-under, I'm sure it's going to be about 1.5. So maybe you just take the under there or take the fight to end in the first round. So
yeah, the under will probably be like minus 200 too.
Yeah, I probably will. That's what we're thinking for the main event. We're both on the side of Zhang by knockout. You can also get the under in that main event for probably a better odds than that money line has at minus 370. But in the co-main event, we have a very entertaining featherweight matchup between Brian Ortega, who stays at 145 pounds, this time taking on former 135-pound champion Aljamain Sterling. I really love this matchup, Pat. I think that this is a great grappler in Ortega versus a guy who also is a very good grappler, maybe a little bit stronger in Aljamain Sterling. I'm interested to see who gets the better of each other on the feet in this one.
This fight ruins me. I wanted this fight. I have a tweet of me calling for it 3 years ago, back at the end of 2022, when Aljo moved up to featherweight and he was fighting Calvin Kattar. My exact tweet was, I'd rather see him fight a guy like Ortega. I think this is too easy of a matchup for him. And then he steamrolled Kattar, and now years later, we're getting the Ortega fight. I wish we got it then. That's all I'll say. I love the fight. It is one of my fantasy matchups for years. Genuinely one of the fights that, like, if you said to me, like, who are two guys that, like, weight class wise, that you'd want to see fight that are close enough but probably won't, this would have been one of them, But the problem is now that they're so much older, I'm really interested to see how both of them come out here, especially Ortega. He says he's coming out with, like, a War-Tega thing now. So I don't know how true that is, but I do think Aljamain will probably be able to stay safe enough, stay smart enough to control this fight and not get caught into submission. But hey, there's very much a chance that Ortega can catch him in something from his back, because he's one of the best at doing it.
We had a quick question here from Grayson. Wants to talk about the Bryce Meredith matchup versus, he calls the Cuban guy, Lazaro Dayron. Now, I do have a question for you, Pat, because I know there was a Cuban prospect beat Danny Sabatello. Is this the same guy?
Yes, this is Dayron. He didn't beat him. It was a draw.
Oh, it was.
It was
So this guy was on the
I
remember this guy was on the Cuban Olympic team for wrestling. So it's a Cuban Olympic wrestler versus Bryce Meredith, who is a very accomplished Division I American wrestler. So it's going to be very entertaining. Bryce Meredith was actually rocked last time I saw him in San Diego. Had to overcome some adversity in that first round, but he's a tremendous athlete from America. So I think that he's got a good chance, but he hasn't necessarily faced the level of competition Danny Sabatello had. And Sabatello, who is also an American All-American wrestler at Purdue, had some trouble with Dayron and his matchup and got bounced from the PFL because of it.
Yeah, so just to give a little insight, I'm a Contender Series guy. So Manuel Exposito, the guy who Jose Delano beat in the main event last night, he fought Dayron 3 fights ago for Dayron, and Dayron beat him by decision. So Dayron is in my opinion, Contender Series level guy. He is a guy that he's a legit prospect. He, like you said, the legit wrestling. He honestly actually struggled to get Exposito down in that fight because Exposito is a very good wrestler too. Struggled to get Exposito down, but ended up winning it on the feet. Rocked Exposito late, ended up settling into his striking. And we saw against Sabatello, which was only 2 fights later for him, and a year later, I thought his striking looked a lot better in the Sabatello fight afterwards. So I've actually watched Dayron fight twice now, and I've been very impressed with him both times. Bryce Meredith, I've watched him fight in person multiple times, and it's an interesting one with Bryce because he's definitely due for a step up in competition at this point, but it feels like he hasn't gotten something close to Dayron. Like this is a big step up in competition. Yeah. This is like records wise, he fought a 4-1 guy in his last fight, a 13-6 guy in the fight before. No, this is a different level of competition in all honesty, and that's what worries me. It makes sense. I think it's too much. I really do. I like Bryce Meredith a lot, and I think he's a great fighter, and I think he is a better prospect than some people think. I've seen some people that are a lot lower on him than I am. I do think he's a pretty good prospect. I think Dayron is too much for him too early, I guess you could say. It's not even early. It's the right time for him to take this step up. So that's where I'm interested here because, like I said, it's the right time for the step up, but I don't think he is ready for this step up specifically.
Yeah, I hope we answered that question for you, Grayson. Thanks for commenting and asking about the fight. We do have, like we mentioned, we have this matchup between Aljamain Sterling and Brian Ortega that we were breaking down. Officially on my prediction, I'm kind of leading towards the sign of Aljamain Sterling by decision, right? So I think that Brian Ortega has mentioned about going to 155 in the past. I don't know if his mind and body.
Don't forget, 5 rounds.
This co-main event.
5-round co-main event, my friend.
Wow. So that puts a new wrinkle into
that. Factor that in as well. I know. I completely forgot. I saw Aljamain comment the other day on it, and that he wasn't a fan of it. Actually, he didn't like the fact that it was a 5-round.
Well, with Ortega being a tricky guy, that's a lot of time that you got to control somebody where they have dangerous submissions on the ground.
Well, I mean, we saw it with Volk. Volk got out by the grace of God. He got out of that guillotine by the grace of God. You know what I mean? So, and that's Volk. So. And Aljo's a former 135er. It is going to be interesting to see if he could really control Ortega for 5. I honestly, I like Ortega to get a submission if this is a year or 2 ago, maybe, or 2 years ago, maybe. But
yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's a little old. Man. Going to 155. Is his heart still at 145 pounds? I'm gonna have to take Aljo by decision. Who you got?
Yeah, I'm going to end up rolling with the same thing as of now, but I'm an Ortega fan for life, so I'll definitely have something on Ortega, something somewhere.
Yeah, certainly. His fight with Volkanovski is one of the greatest we've seen, especially in recent UFC history. Moving on down the card, though, we have a very entertaining heavyweight matchup between 2 ranked fighters that like to finish fights. Former professional baseball player Waldo Cortez Acosta on the powerhouse Russian Sergey Pavlovich, who tied the UFC record for knockouts consecutively in the first round with 6, tying Don Fry. Waldo Cortez Acosta is 14-1 and has beaten guys like Robelis de Spain, who are world-class strikers in the past. So what do you think of here's the thing with Cortez Acosta. Everybody always counts him out, right? They're like, oh, he's the baseball guy. He doesn't have real skills. You know what his best skill is? His mind. He is so smart. He is a guy who goes into these fights, and if you're a grappler, he's going to stand up and he's going to throw that big right hand at you, and you're going to have to deal with it. And if you're a wrestler, and if you're a striker, like to Spain, he's going to do his best to use his frame and take you down because he is a big boy still, and he is a good athlete, and he has good feet and good balance and good coordination. So really with him, I just think he's a plus athlete, and I think that his mind is very good. He's a very, strategic fighter. He has good game plans coming in, but is that going to be enough against a guy like Sergey Pavlovich, who you can really kind of throw game plans out the window against because he just charges you from the first 30 seconds and tries to get you out of there. And if he can't, he deals with it for the rest of the 15. So I don't know. My heart wants to take Sergey Pavlovich by knockout, but coming off losses to Alexander Volkov and Tom Aspinall, this is kind of a get right fight for Pavlovich. But I hate
he had his get right fight.
What?
He had his get right fight against Rosenstrike. Remember, he out wrestled Rosenstrike for 15 minutes in the most boring fight you could imagine.
And then they cut him. Yep, you're right.
Yep, because everyone was expecting that to be a banger, and then Pavlovich just wrestled him for 15 minutes, and everyone was like, "Whoa!" So that's where he got his get back, but it wasn't impressive, and it wasn't the Pavlovich we've ever seen. It was his first. I'm pretty sure it was his first decision win of his. Oh no, not his first decision win of his career. First decision win in the UFC for Pavlovich. So very interesting there. And that's why it's like that makes it even more interesting to me, in my opinion, because we've seen now Pavlovich use his wrestling. So if Waldo goes to take him down, is Pavlovich the better wrestler? There's interesting questions to be brought up here. But if you want me to be honest, okay, and this is going back now to not even before his MMA career, but long enough before. Oh no, it was basically before his MMA career when Robellis was a boxer. Waldo was a boxer. He had been knocked out bad twice in 2 different boxing matches on the feet. I think I'm going to say that, so Sergey Pavlovich is the guy that has the power that will put him out, I think we saw in his last fight that he could wrestle enough. So I think if Waldo tries to wrestle with him, we might see better defense than we expect or something. And I could definitely see Pavlovich being the guy that, knocks Waldo out in MMA.
Yeah, I could see too. I'm going to take Pavlovich by knockout just like Pat is. Probably gets it done in the first round, but if he doesn't, I think that this favors Waldo as the fight gets longer, it goes longer. If it goes to decision, maybe Waldo pulls off a upset win there, Pat. Is there another fight? Sumadarji fights Kevin Boras. I think that's going to be all action, something we're tuning in for a fight of the night contender. But is there something else you want to talk about here? One fight before we get going, Loner Kavanaugh, Charles Johnson. I think that's a really big fight for the flyweight division. Charles Johnson has beaten guys like Joshua Van. He's gone on long win streaks. He's got very good wrestling. He's a tremendous competitor. He does not give in these matchups against up-and-coming guys. He actually proves a point at certain times that he is somebody who deserves to continue to be in the rankings, and these guys aren't ready. So he's kind of the prospect killer here at the flyweight division. What do you think about Charles Johnson versus Loner Kavanaugh? Obviously a very talented striker in Loner Kavanaugh coming off the Contender Series last year. And he had a decision win recently over a fighter that we're very, very high on. Who did he just beat by decision?
Jose Ochoa.
Yep. And that was a really good fight from both guys. So I was impressed with Kavanaugh in that fight. What do you think about that matchup?
Yeah, I mean, Kavanaugh was one of my top prospects before he hit the UFC. I was intrigued by him, enamored by him. I thought he was awesome. Probably my top flyweight before he even came in. And then his Contender Series fight only solidified that. He fought another top flyweight prospect and knocked him out in 2 minutes. So I love Kavanaugh. He has shown a bit of issues with, I don't know if it's more defense or chin. I think it's defense more than chin, I'd say. But he does get dropped sometimes. He gets clipped or whatever. And I could see that happening here against Charles Johnson. But I feel like for the most part, like Josh Van fight, but for the most part, Johnson isn't a one-punch knockout artist, right? Like, apart from that, he really hasn't one-punched a lot of people in general, especially in the UFC. I don't think he's on one-punched anyone else.
I think that was kind of because Van was just tiring in the third round, right? It was more like an accumulation.
Yeah, that was just an interesting one. But he only has 2 knockout wins in the UFC. The other one was Jimmy Flick, and I remember that was a sequence. That wasn't just a hit. So
and Jimmy Flick, I believe, has 11 submission wins and no knockouts.
Yes, yes, and Jimmy Flick's only a grappler. I think
Yeah.
Kavanaugh is very well rounded. Well, that's where I'm going with it. I think Kavanaugh's very well rounded. I think he is an incredibly well rounded prospect, and I think that if he does end up finding trouble on the feet, he'll probably be able to get this fight to the ground and control it there and win on the ground. But he might not even find problems on the feet because I do think his kickboxing is better than Charles's. So I think that if he is able to mix the kickboxing well enough, he could just beat Charles alone with that. It just really matters how well his striking defense is in this fight and how much he allows Johnson to catch him with those straight punches down the middle. But I still think I favor Kavanaugh here by decision.
Yeah, I'm going to go the same way as you. A very highly potential prospect in Loner Kavanaugh, but he's facing a guy in Charles Johnson who has good grappling. I see this kind of striker versus grappler. If Charles Johnson can take him down, he might grind out a decision victory against the cage and in the clinch and in some of those moments where he does his best work. But if this fight is fought from the outside, I do favor Loner Kavanaugh, and maybe he even ends up getting a knockout or cruises to a decision win with his wrestling. I think this is a very competitive fight, and it's one that fight fans should tune in for early on the prelims. Anything else you want to talk about here, Pat, before we sign off?
Shout out Kyle Dawkins back in the UFC, taking on Michel Pereira in a fight that is obviously not a good matchup for him at all.
No.
Knowing the history that he has and the chin and everything, but still taking the fight. So I really respect it from Kyle Dawkins. I think if he survives the first round, he's very live to beat Michel Pereira. So very, very fun one there. I think it's cool to see Dawkins back in the UFC.
What do you think about Brian Battle getting cut?
Oh, I think Battle getting cut is interesting for sure. I don't know. I don't know if he'll go to PFL or not, but it seems like that's the only other place he'd really go.
Yeah.
It's a weird one.
Tough. It's a tough day for him.
Well, it's a tough situation only because, I don't know if I agree with it or disagree with it either. I'm kind of about it because it was rough moving up to, 170 to 185. You're not moving up 10 pounds. He moved up 15 pounds and still missed weight by even more than he did at 170.
And he looks so good at 170. You got to try everything that you have to continue staying at 170 pounds. He lost to Fakhretdinov. All right. I think Fakhretdinov is the dark horse of the entire division. If you throw him to guys in the top 5, certain guys, he would beat them right now. Is he somebody who fights 4 times a year because of Ramadan? No, he's not. But he's a very, very good grappler, and he got a draw, with Zaleski dos Santos and some other people, and his career's going in a different direction. But I think you're right. Brian Battle is somebody who probably should have stuck around the promotion, and it was just a shame that he couldn't make 170 pounds.
No, I mean 100%. And it stinks. But for this card in Shanghai, one more name I want to throw out. Not even the fight as much as just the name. Talieke Nuaraji. I don't know how to say his first name perfectly, but Nuaraji is definitely one to look out for. He's on the main card against Kiefer Crosby. This is the biggest setup fight, for a Chinese fighter. It's even bigger than the main event, I'd say.
I was like,
really want to see Nuaraji
on the roster still.
Well, and the thing is, Nuaraji is one of the better. I want to say he's Vietnamese, Chinese. So he's one of the better Chinese prospects in general. So I think that. Not even just better, entertaining. He's fun, he's really fun. All his wins are by knockouts, and a lot of them were within the first couple of minutes. So he's a guy that's just a war monster. That's a perfect term for him. So I think he's just going to bring that war to Crosby and take him out. But he's one to look out for sure.
All right, fight fans, that is our analysis this week for PFL and UFC. We will come to you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. with any breaking news and analysis from the fights this coming week. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.